Yeah, so originally I was just going to do three AI podcasts with you, with Grok, and with Meta, but I got a bunch of messages saying that people really like this. And I think that it's something that I'll do here and there, especially on topics such as the one we're covering today, where it seems like it'd be really hard to find somebody I could banter with the way that I do with you on this specific topic. So today's podcast is all about health and wellness. So just for context, I'm currently in like the best shape of my entire life. And I did this with the help of you. Like you helped a lot with understanding nutrition and caloric intake and deficit and macronutrients. And you just answered a lot of questions that I found really helpful. So I feel like if we just have a conversation about this, that it can help a lot of people as well. So that's why I have you here.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear you've made such great progress on your health and wellness journey. It's awesome that the information we discussed helped you achieve your goals. I'm excited to dive into this topic and share insights that could benefit others. Let's get started. What aspect of health and wellness do you want to dive into first?
So one thing that really surprised me when I talked to you is we talked about caloric deficit. And I said, for example, person A would have all their macros, and we'll get to macros later, but will have all their macros in line. They'll be eating perfectly healthy. They'll be consuming their body weight in protein. They'll have a certain carbohydrate threshold, certain fat threshold. And if they have those perfectly at a 500 caloric deficit, and they're also working out and running and they're burning about 2,000 calories a day, which is so much, and they end up being in a 500 caloric deficit, you said that their weight loss would pretty much be similar to a person B who's eating like candy and donuts and not working out at all, but still at that 500 calorie deficit.
Yes, that's a really interesting point about weight loss. When it comes to losing weight, the primary driver is the calorie deficit, meaning you consume fewer calories than your body expends. If person A and person B both maintain the same 500 calorie deficit, their weight loss over time would be similar, regardless of whether one is eating nutritious foods and exercising, and the other is eating junk food and being sedentary. However, there's more to overall health and body composition than just weight loss. Person A, who focuses on nutritious foods and regular exercise, will likely experience better muscle retention, improved energy levels, better nutrient intake, and overall better health markers. Person B, on the other hand, may lose weight but could face nutrient deficiencies, lower energy levels, and a higher risk of losing muscle mass along with fat. So while the scale might show similar results, the quality of weight loss and overall well-being will likely be much better for the person prioritizing healthy habits.
Right. So basically, they lose weight, but it also sounds like if they don't have their macronutrients in order, then they actually might be losing more weight because they'd be losing muscle if they're not getting enough protein. Is that said to be true as well?
Exactly. When someone isn't getting enough protein, especially while in a calorie deficit, they risk losing muscle mass along with fat. Protein is essential for maintaining muscle tissue, especially when you're in a caloric deficit and engaging in activities like strength training or running. Without adequate protein, the body may break down muscle tissue for energy and repair processes. This can lead to a higher percentage of weight loss coming from muscle rather than fat. As a result, even though the scale might show a similar amount of weight loss, the person who isn't meeting their protein needs could end up with a higher body fat percentage and less muscle definition. That's why focusing on balanced macronutrients, particularly adequate protein intake, helps preserve muscle mass, supports metabolic health, and generally leads to better overall body composition and performance.
Okay, that's really interesting. So basically, they are you saying they would lose the same amount of weight, but person B would actually just be losing muscle as part of the weight that they're losing due to the similar caloric deficit?
Yes, that's correct. Both individuals would likely lose a similar amount of total weight if they maintain the same caloric deficit. However, the composition of that weight loss would differ. The person who isn't getting enough protein and nutrients, person B, would be more likely to lose a greater proportion of muscle mass along with fat. This means that even though the scale might show similar results, person B would end up with less muscle and potentially a higher body fat percentage compared to someone who maintains proper nutrition and protein intake, person A. In short, While both can achieve weight loss, the quality of that weight loss, meaning how much muscle is preserved and how healthy the overall body composition remains, depends heavily on proper nutrition and macronutrient balance.
Gotcha. And okay, so the next thing that really surprised me was, when I first started getting into this type of stuff, I would be all about like, okay, I'm going to run all the time. That way I can lose weight. I wasn't necessarily even, I didn't even know what I didn't know. So I was just basically like running to run because I knew that if I ran, it would burn fat. But after talking to you, I realized it's literally only about caloric deficit. So let's take a person A and B scenario again, where person A, he works out at the gym, 6 days a week or whatever, but doesn't run, has the same macros, let's say out 180 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbohydrates, and 120 grams of fat. Person B has that exact same macronutrients, but he's also running a lot. Same macronutrients based on percentages, because obviously he's going to be eating more because he's burning more, but he's still at that same 500 calorie deficit as person A. Basically, if they have the exact same percentage of macronutrients based on protein, fat, and carbohydrates, would there be any difference whatsoever between the person who says runs like 3 hours a day and works out at the gym 6 days a week with heavy weights versus the other person who doesn't run at all but works out at the gym 6 days a week, and they both maintain the same caloric deficit?
In terms of pure weight loss, if both individuals maintain the same caloric deficit and have the same macronutrient ratios, the amount of weight they lose over time would be very similar. Both would be in a 500 calorie deficit, so the overall energy balance, calories in versus calories out, would dictate their weight loss. However, there would be significant differences in their body composition and overall fitness. 1. Muscle mass and strength. The person who lifts weights and runs extensively might experience more cardiovascular endurance and potentially better overall conditioning. However, if both are consuming sufficient protein, they would both preserve muscle mass, but the person doing more cardio might experience slightly less muscle growth compared to someone focusing primarily on resistance training. 2. Cardiovascular health. The person who runs frequently would likely have better cardiovascular fitness, improved endurance, and possibly better metabolic flexibility. 3. Fat loss versus weight loss. While both would lose weight, the distribution of that weight loss might differ. The person running a lot might burn more calories overall, allowing them to potentially eat more while maintaining the same deficit. This could lead to slightly different fat distribution and energy levels throughout the day. 4. Recovery and performance. The person doing intense cardio and weight training might need more recovery time. If recovery isn't managed well, it could impact muscle retention, performance, and overall well-being. In summary, while their weight loss would be similar in terms of sheer numbers on the scale, their body composition, fitness levels, and overall health markers could vary significantly based on their exercise routines. Both approaches have their own benefits, but it's about aligning your goals, whether it's overall conditioning, muscle growth, or cardiovascular health, with your chosen training regimen.
See, I think that's insane because in my head, I'm thinking about, okay, the guy who's lifting a ton of weights and running a bunch, he's going to be a lot more like muscular and leaner. Like the guy running a bunch is actually going to cut more fat. But from the sound of what you're saying, it's actually the opposite. The person who's running a lot and working out a lot is actually going to have less muscle and be the same amount of leanness per se, with slightly different variations. Like you said, muscle distribution and fat distribution is going to be a little bit different. But the person who's not running and still in that same caloric deficit is actually going to be more muscular with the same amount of leanness. Is that correct?
You've got it. The main reason is that when you're in a calorie deficit, your body is looking for energy. If you're running a lot and lifting weights, you're placing a high energy demand on your body. Without enough calories and protein, your body might break down muscle tissue to meet those demands. This can lead to muscle loss, especially if protein intake isn't sufficient to support muscle repair and growth. On the other hand, someone who is not doing as much cardio and instead focusing on strength training with adequate protein intake is more likely to preserve or even build muscle mass. They may lose fat at a similar rate because the overall calorie deficit is the same, but they'll likely retain more muscle mass, resulting in a more defined and muscular appearance. So, while both individuals might lose a similar amount of weight, The person who's prioritizing strength training and protein intake will likely have a better muscle to fat ratio, leading to a more toned and lean appearance.
See, that's crazy to me because I think like most people would logically think the person running all the time is actually going to be more cut and more defined, but it sounds like that's not the case. The next thing that really surprised me talking to you that I learned is how, like, okay, I've done keto and I've also done carnivore, and there seems to be this consensus amongst most people, especially myself, where it's like, okay, if you do keto and carnivore, you're actually going to be burning fat, which means your body's going to be burning more fat, which means you're going to be burning the fat on your body, which means you're going to actually be more lean. But what was always confusing to me is I'd see these people who are absolutely jacked, super lean, like 3% body fat, and they're eating like sourdough bread and whatnot. So obviously there's something going on there. So you clarified this for me and tell me if I got this correct or not. Basically, you said, and it goes back to the whole theme of the beginning of this podcast, where essentially, like, if you say you want to eat a bunch of carbs, as long as you're getting that 180 grams, say I'm 170 pounds, as long as I'm getting that 170 grams of protein or whatever the sufficient amount of protein is, it really doesn't matter how many carbs you have. As long as you're still in that caloric deficit, you're gonna burn the fat. Is that correct?
Yes,
And before you answer, I want you to continue with that answer, but I also want to say that, like, is it also false to say that if you're in keto and you're using fat as fuel, your body's not going to burn any more fat off of your body as if you weren't in keto? It literally just comes down to that caloric deficit to determine how much fat you're burning as long as your protein goals are met.
exactly. That's a great way to put it. In the end, whether you're on a keto diet or eating a higher carb diet, the primary factor that determines fat loss is the calorie deficit. If your body needs more energy than you're consuming, it will tap into stored fat reserves to make up the difference. On a keto diet, your body becomes efficient at burning fat for fuel, but that fat can come from both the dietary fat you eat and the fat stored in your body. If you consume a lot of dietary fat and end up at maintenance calories or a surplus, your body won't need to dip into stored body fat. Conversely, if you're in a calorie deficit and meeting your protein needs, your body will break down stored fat to meet its energy demands, regardless of whether you're following keto, a high-carb diet, or anything in between. The main takeaway is that as long as you maintain a caloric deficit and sufficient protein intake, your body composition will improve by shedding fat while preserving muscle mass, no matter the macronutrient breakdown. That's why some people can maintain a lean physique while including carbs in their diet, because they still prioritize overall calorie balance and protein intake.
And this podcast is also brought to you by AutoDS. AutoDS is one of the industry leaders in all dropshipping fulfillment tools, but they take it a whole lot of steps further. Not only can you get dropshipping time down to 2 to 3 business days, you also get so many more tools. Because AutoDS is one of the biggest dropshipping softwares in the world, they've implemented a product research tool that tracks all their analytics, all their orders, and then you can use that data to find your own winning products and see where the trends are going, or even use a product that you know is selling really well right now. They have a TikTok ad spy tool built in, so you can even look deep into the TikTok ad side of things for all your product research needs. And all of it is automated. Gone are the days where you need like a VA going around and fulfilling these orders for you. AutoDS, it is completely automated. Not even just the orders, but also the tracking updates and the returns. All of that is taken care of by them. They already have a lineup of 500 million products you can choose from. It sounds like a joke, but that's an actual truth. But I think what really makes them stand out is all their worldwide suppliers that they're connected to. Because most softwares are just like AliExpress and their own suppliers, but these guys are, you know, Amazon, Walmart, eBay, Costco, Target, Overstock, Lowe's, and so many more. AutoDS is truly the all-in-one tool you need for all your dropshipping needs. So if you'd like to test it out, go to the link in the description below. You'll get a special deal through my link. Whether you're brand new at dropshipping or an experienced dropshipper, definitely check these guys out. Now back to the podcast. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. One thing I saw Paul Saladino talking about recently is, you know, he says a lot of people have these discussions where it's solely based on caloric balance and caloric deficit, and like caloric deficit is king. But his argument was essentially like when you eat processed foods or you eat any of these like chemicals, it actually can inhibit the body's natural breakdown of certain things such as fat and energy and whatnot. And I want to know what your take on that is, because say you can still meet your protein needs and you can still meet actually all your macro needs, but you're eating McDonald's for every single meal, like process, or not even McDonald's. It doesn't have to be McDonald's, but like say you're eating processed meat for all your protein, you're eating processed carbs for all your carbs, and eating processed fats for all your fats. Let's do that person A and B scenario again, where person A is hitting the exact same caloric and macronutrients that person B is doing. The only difference between person A and B is one is 100% processed, the other is 100% non processed and pure organic. Obviously, health is going to play into this, but in terms of actual physique, and they do the same exact workouts and same caloric deficit, everything's the same except for the processed and the unprocessed. Is it possible that those two physiques will be different? And if so, let me know. And also tell me what the main difference would be between those two people.
That's a great question and a really interesting scenario to think about. From a purely caloric and macronutrient perspective, if both individuals have identical calorie and macro intakes, and they follow the same exercise regimen, their weight loss and muscle retention should theoretically be similar. Both would lose weight in line with their caloric deficit and preserve muscle mass thanks to adequate protein and exercise. However,
Yep. Oh, go ahead. What you can start wherever when you said however.
Sure. So, however, the quality of foods can impact more than just the number on the scale. Processed foods often contain additives, preservatives, and inflammatory ingredients that can affect hormonal balance, gut health, and even energy levels. These factors can influence how the body metabolizes nutrients and recovers from exercise. For instance, a diet high in processed foods can lead to chronic inflammation, which may hinder recovery, reduce performance, and potentially affect body composition. On the other hand, a diet rich in whole, nutrient-dense foods supports better digestion, stable energy levels, and optimal hormonal function. This can lead to better workout performance, more efficient muscle recovery, and potentially a more defined physique. Additionally, whole foods tend to provide a wider range of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that support metabolic health and overall well-being. Over time, these subtle differences can translate into variations in muscle definition, fat distribution, and even how lean or cut to someone appears, even if the scale shows the same weight. In short, while caloric balance is the main driver of weight loss, the quality of the food can influence body composition, recovery, and overall health, which can result in noticeable differences in physique.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So sorry, I got a delivery behind you when you were talking, so I missed a couple of those points. But basically, tell me this. So, is it like, would you say that eating processed meat opposed to natural meat, is there a difference in the actual I think it's called bioavailability, that the body can actually process that protein? Like, for example, I know vegan meat has a much lower, and correct me if I'm wrong, but um, vegan meat, fake meat, has a lower bioavailability to synthesize in the body once it's taken, opposed to like something like ground beef. So is that the same with processed meat, where like even though you're eating say 180 grams of processed meat, your body can only metabolize maybe like 120 based on the actual quality of the nutrients that are in that meat?
Yes, you're absolutely on the right track. Bioavailability refers to how well our bodies can absorb and utilize the nutrients from the foods we eat. Different protein sources have different levels of bioavailability depending on their composition and how they're processed. When it comes to processed meat versus whole, unprocessed meat, the protein itself is usually still relatively bioavailable. However, processed meats often contain additives, fillers, and preservatives that can affect overall digestion and nutrient absorption. For example, processed meats may include added sodium, nitrates, or other substances that could influence how your body processes and uses the protein. In contrast, whole, unprocessed meats are generally more straightforward in terms of their nutrient profile. They provide high-quality protein along with natural vitamins and minerals that support overall health and metabolism. This means the body may process and utilize the protein from whole meats more efficiently. To summarize, while the difference in bioavailability between processed and whole meats might not be as drastic as the difference between animal and plant proteins, there can still be some variation. Whole, unprocessed meats generally provide a cleaner, more efficient source of protein and nutrients that support optimal muscle synthesis and overall health. So, while you might hit the same macro targets with processed meats, the overall quality of the diet can still influence your physique and health outcomes.
Okay. One topic I want to move on to. It's a very controversial topic. A lot of people have said, oh, I can't lose weight because of a thyroid issue or a metabolism issue. In those cases, that would be a specific case where caloric deficit wouldn't necessarily determine fat loss. Like, is it possible? Like, I actually don't know the answer to this. Like, are those people actually lying? Because the general consensus online from the fitness group is like these people are lying and making excuses. But is it possible for someone with a thyroid issue or a metabolism issue to be in a caloric deficit daily and actually still put on weight?
This is a really important topic, and it can be quite complex. Generally speaking, the principle of a caloric deficit still applies to everyone, including those with thyroid or metabolic issues. If someone is truly in a caloric deficit, they will lose weight over time. However, the presence of thyroid or metabolic disorders can significantly affect how the body regulates energy and how easy or difficult it is to achieve that deficit. For example, an underactive thyroid, hypothyroidism, can slow down metabolism, making it harder to achieve a caloric deficit with the same calorie intake as someone with a normal metabolism. It doesn't mean they can't lose weight, but it means they might have to be more meticulous about their calorie intake and might experience a slower progress. There are also conditions like insulin resistance or other hormonal imbalances that can make weight loss more challenging. These conditions can affect how the body stores and uses energy, and they may cause fluctuations in water retention or muscle mass that can obscure weight loss on the scale.
So give me an example of like the most extreme. Give me the most extreme example that has a real life um, example to it where, like, hold on, scratch that. Is there, like, how extreme can it go? Is what I'm trying to ask. Is it possible for someone to be in like a 1,000 caloric deficit and still not be seeing any weight loss at all? Or is that something that even with the most intense thyroid or insulin or metabolic issue that there's no way that if they stay at a 1,000 caloric deficit per day, they're not going to lose weight?
That's a great question. In general, even in extreme cases of metabolic or hormonal issues, if someone is truly in a significant caloric deficit, like 1,000 calories below their maintenance level, they should lose weight over time. The laws of thermodynamics dictate that if the body is burning more energy than it's consuming, it will need to use stored energy, fat, muscle, or glycogen, to make up the difference. However, certain medical conditions can complicate how this deficit manifests. For example, hypothyroidism, a severely underactive thyroid, can significantly slow metabolism, making it harder to reach a caloric deficit without very careful calorie control and possibly medical treatment like thyroid hormone replacement. 2. Insulin resistance or PCOS. Conditions like insulin resistance or polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, can alter how the body processes and stores energy. This can cause fluctuations in water retention and make weight loss appear slower or more difficult. But ultimately, a sustained caloric deficit will result in fat loss. 3. Fluid retention. Some conditions can cause significant fluid retention, masking fat loss on the scale. This means someone might be losing fat, but not see it reflected in their weight due to excess water retention. In extreme scenarios, it might seem like someone isn't losing weight despite a large caloric deficit. But usually, these scenarios involve factors like water retention or measurement inaccuracies, rather than a literal impossibility to lose fat. Over time, as long as the caloric deficit is real and consistent, fat loss will occur. It might just require more patience, medical management, and possibly more precise monitoring to see the progress.
Okay, yeah, you brought up a great topic there about water retention because, I eat a lot of sunflower seeds to curb hunger, especially late at night. And I never really paid attention to like sodium. Is that a micronutrient? I don't even know, but sodium. I don't really care if I get a lot of sodium. I was always under the impression, oh, sodium's actually going to give me more energy, so it's fine to eat however much. But I golfed with these guys the other day, and they said that they avoid sodium, and I'm like, why do you do that? And he's like, I just don't want to be holding all that water weight. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So can you break down essentially in the most simple terms how a certain amount of sodium can actually put on water weight because, like I told you before, currently I'm in one of the best shapes of my life. I was about 4 or 5 days ago, but then this weekend was Memorial Day weekend, and I was going out and eating whatever I wanted, and I put on like 8 pounds in 3 days. And I know a lot of that was probably sodium because I'm not eating tons of sodium usually, but I was eating like just bad food, which I know has a lot of sodium. So I know from basically a rough understanding that a lot of that could be water weight that I was putting on, especially now that, in the past 2 days, I've lost 6 pounds because of that sodium. But there was one time when I was 163 pounds and I went to Boulder for 4 days and went up to 181 pounds. And that was like alarming, but I also know that was probably has to do with sodium too. So like, how do you know what weight you're putting on is due to sodium and water retention or actual fat that you're putting on your body? Because I will say, like, even though I did consume a lot of sodium, I can actually feel physically on my stomach like there's a layer of fat that wasn't there before I ate really badly those 3 days.
That's a really relatable scenario, and it highlights how quickly our bodies can fluctuate due to water retention. Sodium plays a big role in how much water your body holds onto because it helps regulate fluid balance. When you consume a lot of sodium, your body retains extra water to balance out the sodium levels in your bloodstream. This can cause a temporary increase in water weight, which can be significant, sometimes several pounds in just a few days. This water retention can make you feel bloated, and it can mask your actual body composition by adding a layer of fluid under the skin. On the other hand, actual fat gain happens more gradually and requires a sustained caloric surplus over time. If you've had a weekend of indulging in high sodium, high calorie foods, some of the weight you see on the scale will be from water retention due to sodium, and some might be from a temporary increase in glycogen, stored carbohydrate, and the water that comes along with it. If you notice that your weight drops back down after a few days of normal eating and hydration, that's a strong sign that the weight gain was mostly water retention and glycogen rather than actual fat. Fat gain from a short period of overeating usually takes longer to accumulate and won't disappear as quickly as water weight. So when you see rapid changes in weight over a few days, it's likely mostly water weight driven by sodium and carbohydrate intake. Actual fat gain happens more gradually and requires a sustained caloric surplus over time. If you're mindful of sodium intake and stay hydrated, you'll have a clearer picture of your actual body composition changes.
So then what is the purpose of sodium and how do you know like how much to eat? Like for example, I put salt and pepper on my steaks and I put salt and pepper on my venison and all that. Would it be a smart idea to say cut it completely out like and just get sodium from natural sources wherever that may be? And if not, like what purpose does it actually serve to the body like besides like holding water above the muscles?
Sodium plays a crucial role in the body beyond just water retention. It's an essential electrolyte that helps regulate fluid balance, nerve function, and muscle contractions. Here are some of sodium's key functions. 1. Fluid balance. Sodium helps maintain the balance of fluids inside and outside your cells, which is vital for hydration and overall cellular function. 2. Nerve function. Sodium is involved in the transmission of nerve impulses. It helps your nerves sense signals that control everything from muscle contractions to sensory perception. 3. Muscle contraction. Sodium works alongside potassium to ensure proper muscle contraction and relaxation. Without the right balance, muscle cramps or weakness can occur. 4. Blood pressure regulation. Sodium helps regulate blood volume and pressure. While too much sodium can contribute to high blood pressure, the right amount is necessary for maintaining normal circulation. When it comes to determining how much sodium you need, it generally depends on individual factors like activity level, climate, and overall health. Athletes or highly active individuals, for example, often require more sodium to replace what's lost through sweat. For most people, using a moderate amount of salty cooking and seasoning is perfectly fine and can help ensure you're getting enough sodium. Cutting out the salt entirely isn't usually necessary unless you had specific medical reasons, like high blood pressure or certain kidney conditions that require sodium restriction. In summary, sodium is essential for many bodily functions, and a moderate amount of salt in your diet can help ensure you meet your needs. If you have concerns about sodium intake, it's always a good idea to consult with a healthcare provider.
This podcast is brought to you by dropshipping.ai. That means this podcast is brought to you by myself. This is my website. This website is completely free for everybody. I don't want your money now or later. This is not some funnel. This is completely free. You get a free dropshipping store built by AI. You get free products chosen by AI, and you get a free course on how to use AI to dropship in the modern day era. AI has changed every industry. Everybody knows that, and dropshipping is not excluded. We have the most relevant, most powerful, most up-to-date information specifically tailored to dropshipping and AI fusion that we're seeing right now. And like I said before, this is completely free. I'm one of Shopify's top affiliates in the entire world. In fact, I was awarded top Shopify affiliate in North America, so they pay me to give you guys this for free. It's a beautiful cycle called the cycle of life. So if you want to support yourself and support this podcast and support me, go to dropshipping.ai, claim that store, claim those products, claim that course, and let's get back to the podcast. Okay, moving on. I've actually asked this question to many people, and nobody's been able to actually give me a proper answer. So I know one of Newton's laws, I'm not sure which, it says energy cannot be created or destroyed. Mass can't be created or destroyed. So how is it, like, okay, before you answer that question, tell me how much, like, in order to put on 10 pounds in a week, how many calories over your intake would you have to be?
To gain 10 pounds in a week, we can use a rough estimate based on the caloric value of a pound of body weight. A commonly used approximation is that 1 pound of body weight is roughly equivalent to about 3,500 calories. So to gain 10 pounds, you'd need a caloric surplus of approximately 35,000 calories over the course of a week. If we break that down per day, that's about 5,000 extra calories every day on top of your maintenance calories. For most people, maintaining a 5,000 calorie surplus every single day for a week is extremely difficult. It would require consuming a massive amount of food, well above normal intake. So while it's theoretically possible, it's highly unlikely to happen under normal circumstances.
Okay, so then tell me how much weight does 7,000 calories of olive oil contain?
Got it. In terms of weight loss and calories, a general rule of thumb is that about 3,500 calories equals roughly 1 pound of body weight.
No. Just tell me exactly how much 7,000 calories worth of olive oil actually like weighs.
Got it. Olive oil contains about 120 calories per tablespoon, and a tablespoon of olive oil weighs roughly 13.5 grams. To find the weight of 7,000 calories of olive oil, we can break it down. The 7,000 calories divided by 120 calories per tablespoon, approximately 58.3 tablespoons. Each tablespoon weighs about 13.5 grams, so 50.3 grams, approximately 787 grams. So 7,000 calories of olive oil weighs approximately 787 grams, which is about 1.74 pounds.
1.74 pounds. Okay, so what's 1.74 times 7?
1.74 times 7 is approximately 12.18. So multiplying the weight of that olive oil by 7 gives you about 12.18 pounds.
Okay. So if you just ate that amount of olive oil per week, it sounds like you would put on the exact amount of weight that you're consuming. But is there any circumstance where you would actually put on more? Like, say, is there any circumstance where if you ate only one thing per day for a week, would you that and in total weighs less than 10 pounds altogether, could you actually put on more weight than you're actually consuming?
In general, the weight you gain or lose is determined by the caloric content and how your body processes those calories, not the physical weight of the food itself. If you consume fewer calories than your body needs to maintain its current weight, you'll lose weight over time, regardless of the type of food. However, there are scenarios where water retention and other factors could temporarily make it seem like you've gained more weight than the actual mass of the food you ate. For example, if you consume a diet extremely high in sodium or carbohydrates, your body might retain more water, leading to a temporary increase on the scale.
Okay, no, that's not what I'm asking. Is it possible to put more fat on? Is it possible to put more weight of fat on your body than weight of food you consume?
Got it. The short answer is no. You can't store more fat on your body than the caloric energy provided by the food you consume. Each gram of fat stored in the body comes from the calories you consume. The body can't create fat out of nothing. If the calories consumed are less than what's required to store that amount of fat, then the body simply doesn't have enough energy to create that fat mass. So, the weight of fat stored on your body cannot exceed the energy content of the food you.
Okay. I guess I was under the impression that olive oil, to put 10 pounds of fat on, you would actually be consuming more like 3 pounds of olive oil. So I guess I was wrong in that.
It's a common misconception. The key thing to remember is that body fat is essentially stored energy. When you consume calories, your body uses some for immediate energy and stores the excess as fat. It takes about 3,500 excess calories to store 1 pound of body fat. So to put on 10 pounds of body fat, you'd need an energy surplus of about 35,000 calories. That means you'd need to consume significantly more calories than your body uses, and that surplus is what translates into fat storage. So while 3 pounds of olive oil might not weigh much, the caloric density of that oil is incredibly high, meaning that the energy it provides can add up quickly if it's beyond what your body needs for fuel. That's why calorie balance is the fundamental factor in weight gain and loss.
All right. So next thing, I'm trying to find like an exception to this rule because, when I did a 7-day fast, I went from 193 pounds to 169, meaning, I lost about 25 pounds in a week, and I didn't consume any food. I only drank water. Now, what if I say my caloric maintenance level is 2,000 calories? Let's say that I consume 2,000 calories a day for a week, but I burn 4,000. Is it logical to say that I would still lose that 25 pounds? Or when you're fasting for that long, would autophagy essentially be eating more fat and eating more things? Like, basically what I'm asking is fasting the exception to the rule of calorie deficit? Like, can you lose more weight fasting, even though it's at the same caloric deficit as somebody who's at that same caloric deficit who's still eating 2,000 calories a day?
That's a great question, and it touches on an important distinction. When you fast, especially for an extended period, the initial rapid weight loss is primarily due to a combination of factors: glycogen depletion, water loss, and some fat loss. Glycogen, the stored form of carbohydrates, is stored with water, so when you burn through glycogen during fasting, you lose a significant amount of water weight along with it. If you compare that to a scenario where someone is eating 2,000 calories a day while maintaining a 1,000 calorie deficit, burning 3,000 calories a day, they would lose weight, but not as rapidly in those first few days. That's because their body still processes the food they consume, maintaining glycogen stores and water levels to a greater extent. In other words, fasting can lead to a more dramatic initial drop in weight due to water loss and glycogen depletion, whereas a steady caloric deficit with food intake may result in a more gradual, consistent fat loss over time. However, once the initial water weight is lost during fasting, further weight loss primarily comes from fat and muscle tissue, which aligns with the same principles of a caloric deficit. So, fasting isn't exactly an exception to the rule, but it can create a more noticeable initial drop in weight due to factors beyond just fat loss. The overall fat loss over a longer period of time would still depend on the total caloric deficit, whether achieved through fasting or through a consistent daily calorie deficit with food.
See, now that's really interesting right there, because I think the general consensus across the entire fitness and health community is that when you fast, your body switches to fat for fuel, so it starts to eat the fat. But you're saying that's not actually true. It's actually what's happening is it's going after the glycogen, and your lack of sodium intake is actually causing you to lose water weight, which shows your muscles more. So you're actually losing the same amount of fat, but the main difference between the 2,000 calorie deficit and when you're fasting, and the 2,000 calorie deficit when you're still eating, is actually the water weight, correct?
That's a really insightful point. When you fast, your body does start to use stored energy, including glycogen and fat. However, glycogen is stored with water, so as you use up glycogen stores during fasting, your body releases the associated water, leading to a rapid drop in water weight. This can give the appearance of a more dramatic weight loss initially. At the same time, once glycogen stores are depleted, your body does shift to burning more fat for fuel. That's why fasting can result in fat loss as well. However, the initial rapid weight loss is largely due to water weight, and the rate of fat loss is ultimately determined by the caloric deficit over time. So while fasting can accelerate the process of tapping into fat stores once glycogen is depleted, the difference in actual fat loss compared to a regular caloric deficit diet might not be as dramatic as it first appears. The initial difference in scale weight is largely due to water loss, and the longer-term fat loss depends on maintaining a consistent caloric deficit.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I never. This is where we're going into uncharted territory, because that's something I always thought of would be just true. You know, it makes sense, but you're kind of blowing my mind now, because a lot of the things that are that's a general consensus in the health community doesn't seem to be true whatsoever. It's actually kind of the illusion of truth. Like, you are losing more weight fasting than you would in that caloric deficit, but it's actually an illusion because it's water weight. Moving on, I want to talk about what you said, what you recommended to me in terms of protein intake. You know, a lot of people talk about the intermittent fasting, like you want to have like an 8-hour window, which is great. But I asked you a really interesting question a few months ago where we talked about the people who do OMAD, 1 meal a day. Like, for example, Andrew Tate does 1 meal a day, and he says he has like 3 steaks. But you said a big issue with that is going to be the now I'm forgetting the actual word for it. It's not bioavailability, but protein synthesis. Your body can only synthesize about 30 to 40 grams of protein per 2 to 3 hours. And so you recommended, like, if I am going to stay in the 8-hour window, to do at least 2 hours between the 30 and 40 gram meals, which has been a really, really good tip. Because I remember when I was 18, I started this. I was eating like 90 grams of protein. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm going to get jacked. But even if I eat 90 grams of protein, I'm still getting the same benefits as if I was actually 40 grams of protein. And if I do go on a calorie surplus and I'm only eating protein, the protein is actually stored as fat. Like, that protein intake then goes into fat, which I found really interesting, because I thought carbs and fat is what gave you fat, not protein. I just thought eating more protein is going to give me more protein, more muscle. But back to the 1 meal a day people, like, can you explain what the issue is if you only have 1 meal a day? Like, say we do another A and B scenario where person A segments their protein by 2 hours, and person B does a 1 meal a day where they eat the same amount of protein, both perfect macros, you know, their body weight and protein and all that, and both the same meals, same workouts. What's going to be the difference between person A, who is doing the 2-hour spatial protein intake, and person B, who's doing the 1 meal a day all at once intake?
That's a great question. The key difference between person A, who spaces out their protein intake, and person B, who consumes all their protein in one meal, is how effectively their bodies can utilize that protein for muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis, MPS, is the process your body uses to build and repair muscle tissue. MPS is stimulated by the presence of amino acids from dietary protein, but it has a limit. Consuming around 20 to 40 grams of high-quality protein at a time maximizes MPS. Beyond that, the additional protein in that meal doesn't significantly increase MPS. The excess amino acids are either used for other bodily functions, converted into glucose, or stored as fat if there's a caloric surplus. For person A, spacing protein intake throughout the day ensures multiple periods of maximal MPS, supporting continuous muscle repair and growth. This approach optimizes muscle protein synthesis over the entire day, potentially leading to better muscle retention and growth if combined with strength training. For person B, who consumes all their protein in one meal, only a portion of that protein is effectively used for muscle protein synthesis at that time. The rest is utilized for other purposes or potentially stored as fat. This means person B might not achieve the same level of continuous muscle protein synthesis throughout the day, which could impact muscle maintenance and growth over time. In practical terms, person A might see better muscle preservation and growth compared to person B, even if their total protein and caloric intake are identical. That's why spreading protein intake throughout the day can be beneficial for muscle health and overall body composition.
Yeah, I mean, that was a game changer for me when you told me that, and that's definitely something I've been doing. ever since. So I want to get back to this caloric deficit thing because there was one more thing that we haven't covered that really blew my mind when you talked to me about it. So let's pretend this person we're hypothetically talking about has a 2,000 calorie per day maintenance and 7 days in a week. So 14,000 calories per week would maintain them, right? So I asked you what the difference would be between person A, who eats 2,000 calories a day and maintains a perfect caloric, balance, and person B, who fasts for 6 days and then on the seventh day eats 14,000 calories that day. And can you tell me what you said about that?
Absolutely. That scenario highlights a key point about caloric balance over time. If someone maintains a total weekly caloric intake of 14,000 calories, it doesn't matter whether they spread it evenly over 7 days or consume it all in one day after fasting for 6 days. The total caloric intake over the week is the same, which means their body will experience the same net energy balance. In other words, from a purely mathematical standpoint, both individuals would end up with the same overall energy balance and therefore the same weight outcome over the long term. The body primarily responds to the overall caloric balance rather than the specific timing of when those calories are consumed. That being said, there are practical differences. Eating 14,000 calories in one day would be extremely difficult and could have short-term effects
Not
of
for me.
digestive discomfort, blood sugar fluctuations, and changes in energy levels.
I've ate
Meanwhile,
30,000 calories in a day. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no worries. So spreading those calories evenly over the week typically leads to more stable energy levels, better nutrient absorption, and less stress on the body. While the total caloric intake and resulting weight change would be the same in both scenarios, the way the body processes and responds to that intake can differ. So the main takeaway is that the overall caloric balance over time is what matters for weight management, whether the calories are evenly spread out or consumed in a more unconventional pattern.
Not being judgmental towards them. I'm being judgmental towards that version of me because I've seen that version of me many times. And every time I look back on that version of myself with judgment. So when I see somebody, oh, yeah, and my pod track cut out, man, every time I see somebody that reminds me of my previous self, it's not that I'm judging them, I'm judging myself. And I wish we could continue this. Maybe we'll do another one someday, but hope you guys like this. I'll see you next time. But it's just so hard for me to wrap my head around that because, like, say someone fasts for 29 days and then on the 30th day eats 60,000 calories somehow. They find the most caloric dense stuff, whether it's like some sort of oil or whatever, and they fast for 29 days, and then every 30 days they eat 60,000 calories, and they do that for a year. It's very hard for me to believe that somebody who eats 2,000 calories a day for a year is going to have the same weight as somebody who's eating once a month 60,000 calories per month, hypothetically speaking.
I totally understand why that sounds counterintuitive. The idea that someone could fast for 29 days and then consume 60,000 calories in one day and still have the same overall weight outcome as someone eating 2,000 calories daily can be a tough concept to accept. What it comes down to is that the body responds to the total energy balance over time. If the total caloric intake over a longer period, like a month or a year, matches the body's maintenance needs, then the overall weight change should be minimal. Of course, this is a theoretical scenario. In reality, there would be practical challenges and physiological responses that could complicate things. For example, eating 60,000 calories in one day would be extremely difficult and could cause a significant digestive and metabolic stress. The body's ability to store and process such a large amount of energy at once might not be as efficient, potentially leading to different metabolic responses. But from a purely mathematical and physiological perspective, if the total caloric intake matches the maintenance level over the long term, the overall weight change should be the same. It's a reminder that our bodies follow the laws of energy balance over time, even if the eating pattern is highly unconventional.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. It seems my camera's overheating, but it's pretty crazy. My camera would be overheating when the sun's not even out and it's like 80 degrees. So I'm not sure what that's about. It is my first time running a podcast outside, and maybe it has to do with my microphone, but I think that's a decent spot to end there. Um, Based on this, before we go, and sorry for the viewers, you're just gonna have to look at me for this last part. Before we go, based on our conversation here, what do you think the biggest because we've covered a lot of misconceptions in myself, and like I said, the general consensus of the health community. We've covered a lot of differences, and we've cleared up a lot of things that apparently were never true to begin with that most people would think are true. What are some things that you think the human race should know that are generally accepted as truth, but are not true at all when it comes to health, wellness, and fitness?
That's a great question, and there are definitely a few big misconceptions that persist in the health and fitness world. First, starvation mode myth. Many people believe that if you eat too few calories, your body will go into starvation mode and hold on to fat, preventing weight loss. In reality, while your metabolism can slow down slightly with prolonged calorie restriction, you will still lose weight if you're in a caloric deficit. The idea that your body completely stops burning fat due to a low calorie intake is a misconception. Second, spot reduction myth. Another common belief is that you can lose fat in specific areas of your body by targeting exercises for those areas, like doing crunches to burn belly fat. In reality, fat loss happens across the entire body as a whole, and you can't control where your body loses fat first. Third, detox and cleanse myths. Many detox diets and cleanses claim to remove toxins from the body and promote rapid weight loss. The truth is that your liver and kidneys already do a fantastic job of detoxifying your body. Most detoxes and cleanses are not supported by scientific evidence and can even be harmful if they involve severe calorie restriction. Fourth, metabolism myths. People often think that metabolism is something fixed and that some people are just cursed with a slow metabolism. While genetics play a role, metabolism can be influenced by factors like muscle mass, activity level, and diet composition. It's not a static number. Fifth, fat versus muscle myths. Some believe that muscle can turn into fat if you stop working out. In reality, muscle and fat are two different tissues. If you stop exercising, you may lose muscle mass, and if you're in a caloric surplus, you may gain fat, but one doesn't transform into the other. Those are some of the big misconceptions that can cause confusion. Understanding these truths can help people make more informed decisions about their health and fitness journeys.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I mean from a young age, I remember because I grew up I would fluctuate. I would be like I remember being in the fourth grade and I knew I was chubby. I was 150, which is like 19 pounds more than I am in the fucking fourth grade. So like I wanted to lose weight. So I remember looking up all these YouTube videos on how to burn belly fat or more so workouts to burn belly fat because I wanted to get rid of my stomach. And then, in the fifth grade, I dropped down and then I put more weight on the set. So I've had fluctuations. So I didn't really understand that until I started talking to you, ChatGPT. Like, I think it's so amazing how, like, I asked my friend Tony a long time ago. I'm like, do you think like this AI stuff is making us smarter or dumber? I think it really depends on how you use it. Like, you have made me so much more smarter of a person in all aspects based on the way I use you. Um, and I just think it's amazing to get down to the nitty gritty and actually get an unbiased take on a lot of topics, especially this one. This is a big topic. And, back I had you, I could Google, how to get rid of what workouts to do, get rid of belly fat, and there'd be plenty of articles, and then people trying to sell you like little packages on their workouts to burn belly fat. But it took me a long time to realize like belly fat doesn't come from like doing crunches. Like if you don't have abs, it's gonna take more to see the abs because they're not jutting out as much, and that's similar across the board. But really, like, you can't do a certain workout and lose belly fat. The only technical workout you can do is something that burns calories, because the caloric deficit that you're going to get from burning those calories is actually what's going to burn not just your belly fat, but all belly fat. I think that one's really interesting. After I ask this next question, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to turn the camera back on, because this last topic I wanted to cover is pretty important. And, right now, I would argue, well, I guess I would argue that society will argue we have a big issue with eating disorders. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, like, because I've seen some people say they have an eating disorder because they basically watch what they eat. And like, I think people start to label eating disorders as anybody who like counts their calories or won't eat certain things. But like, from my perspective, I'm like, you should be like knowing what you consume, what like the macros, the calories you should be. Some people look at me like I have an eating disorder just because I track my protein and my fat and my thing, and I won't eat candy or I won't like, quote unquote live a little and eat something that's poor for me a lot of the time. Sometimes, like very rarely, I'll slip. This weekend's one of the very few times that I did. But how do you personally define the difference between somebody who's health conscious, who likes to track their calories, who's trying to meet their fitness goals and their caloric goals and their macro goals and everything, versus somebody who has a legitimate eating disorder?
That's a really important question, and it's great that you're thinking about it. The difference between being health conscious and having an eating disorder often comes down to the mindset and the level of control these behaviors have over someone's life. Health conscious behavior, being health conscious generally means you're aware of what you're eating, you track your intake to meet your goals, and you prioritize nutritious foods. However, it doesn't dominate your life. You can still enjoy social events, occasional treats, and have flexibility in your routine. The focus is on long-term wellness rather than rigid perfection. Eating disorder involves a more excessive and rigid approach to food and body image. It often includes extreme restriction, binge eating, or other disordered behaviors that cause significant distress and interfere with daily life. Someone with an eating disorder might experience intense anxiety around food, have a distorted body image, or engage in harmful behaviors like purging or overexercising. It's not just about tracking food, it's about the emotional and psychological relationship of food and body. Key differences: flexibility versus rigidity. Health conscious individuals are flexible and can adapt their eating habits without significant distress. People with eating disorders often feel compelled to follow rigid rules and may experience intense guilt or anxiety as they deviate. Emotional impact. Health conscious behavior is generally positive and empowering, while an eating disorder is often accompanied by negative emotions, low self-esteem, and a preoccupation with food and body that interferes with overall well-being. Control versus obsession. Tracking calories and macros can be a useful tool, but it becomes problematic if it turns into an all-consuming obsession that dictates every aspect of life. Ultimately, the key difference is whether the behavior enhances your life and health, or whether it causes harm and distress. Being health conscious is about balance and self-care, while an eating disorder involves a loss of balance and a negative impact on mental and physical health.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that. So you're saying like it's basically more of a psychological issue. My one issue with it is like you said that an eating disorder could be more about a balance thing rather than like seeking perfection. But if you are seeking the people who seek perfection there's no I personally don't believe there's anything such as perfection. There's just excellence, but those people who are still seeking perfection, knowing it's unattainable, like I admire that. I admire somebody like who wants the perfect body per se, so they got to follow a perfect regimen, and then they have the discipline to never deviate from it, no matter what. I personally don't see that as an eating disorder. I see that as somebody who's dedicated to a certain goal. Um, so maybe we're unclear there, but would you say like that person that I just described has an eating disorder, or is it more so if the person's doing it and under like a lot of anxiety and mental stress about it, that would determine if he has an eating disorder? Like, because I don't think it should be considered an eating disorder if you're just extremely disciplined about what you eat and how you work out and everything. Because I admire that. The most successful people in the world are unbalanced. Like, name one person. Oh, what happened here?
I heard you were sharing your personal experience with fluctuating weight from a young age and how you
Oh,
initially
damn.
believed in small
Okay, so
reduction.
hold on. Let me catch you up with it. We're talking about eating disorders. So essentially, I said, I'll just summarize it. I don't see someone who has a perfect diet and a perfect regimen and has the discipline to never deviate from that as an eating disorder. Would you say that they have an eating disorder, or is it only when the psychological comes into play and they start to feel intense anxiety around like cake or something and they want it but they can't have it and they're like slipping? Because you said like like the determination between somebody who's like health conscious and somebody who has an eating disorder is like a balance. But the most successful people in anything are unbalanced. Like, you think Jeff Bezos, for example, in the business world was balanced in his
I'm
life? Or
sorry, but you've hit the time limit.
damn, that's a first. Okay. Well, I guess we can answer that ourselves. Like, that's basically what I was covering, guys. Like, I think it's people are so quick to say, "Oh, this person has that eating disorder nowadays," um, when sometimes just because they can't see themselves doing it, they think the person that is doing it is crazy. You know, I don't think that somebody who has the discipline to never deviate from a healthy diet is crazy. I actually think the opposite. I think the world is crazy. I think it like what's crazy to me is somebody will wake up and have cereal, right? And then they'll go to their work and then they'll have like a sandwich from Witch and Witch or Chick-fil-A or something. Then they'll come home, they'll go out for happy hour with their friends and get a bunch of drinks and maybe some like appetizers like baked potato, and then like they'll go out for dinner, and for dinner they might have, pizza or something like, and then for dessert they'll have ice cream. I don't really hear anybody talking about those people as having an eating disorder and being like crazy. I think those people have an eating disorder and are crazy. Like, if you're eating so much junk every day, like, the world is sick and the world is crazy. So when the majority of the world looks at somebody and calls them crazy, I tend to think those people are the sane ones when it comes to some a topic such as this. Like, I think it's ridiculous that when someone's obsessed with being the best version of themselves or being obsessed with being healthy, that you can just say, oh, they got an eating disorder, but you wouldn't put an eating disorder on somebody who eats like a normal American, and the normal American eats horrible, like 43% obesity rate in this country. Just look around you. And I can be judgmental because I'm not being judgmental. Right now, Snapchat is allowing me to offer you a special deal where if you spend $350 in ads, you're going to get $375 in ad credits. Snapchat's often one of the most overlooked advertising platforms there is, but it's also one of the largest. So if you have ads running on other platforms that are already working, take advantage of this deal just to see what would happen if you took it over to Snapchat, because Snapchat is a whole different audience, and the average Snapchat user opens it 40 times a day. I know a lot of you watching right now open it maybe 60 times a day. So you might as well go ahead and try this out, because you would be surprised how well this works and how many businesses this has really, really scaled up for.